Make magazine launched in 2005, with their first Maker Fair held in 2006. Instead of confining each genre of DIY projects into their own niche publications, Make decided to do something different. Twice a month, the magazine would put people on the map by publishing projects and guides. In an era where DIY communities existed primarily on local meetups in smaller forums, Make represented one of the first places these communities could meet as one. Because to Make magazine, everyone who built things, tinkered around, harbored that sense of creativity and curiosity was, at the end of the day, a maker. It was these very projects that caught my eye as a kid. Fanciful lit up cosplays, microcontroller home automation, stuff like that. 3D printing was one of those things. In the issue of Make magazine you've been staring at, they proudly announce, quote, "The revolution will be squirted." In hindsight, that title and the revolution itself didn't pan out great, and that early 3D printing prophecy of fully self-replicating machines and the, quote, "factory on your desk" felt like it was yet another dying tech dream of the 2000s. But I never stopped dreaming. In fact, a lot of people held on. 3D printing found its niche. This is my Annex Engineering K3. Those are words I've wanted to say proudly for a long time now. As much as this machine is not perfect in any sense of that word, and as much as there will be complaints on the messy cabling and suspicious construction choices, which is fair, it finally works in a state I want to use it in. I built this machine over 3 years across 2 countries, 8,000 miles apart. It is the last printer I will build for the foreseeable future. But before I tell you more about the K3, I'd like to go over some of my personal history with 3D printing. My first interaction with 3D printers happened as MakerBot was actively falling apart, so it might seem odd that I latched on so early to their previous ambitions. In 2014, when I was 6, I drew this picture of a 3D printer. I was drawn to the intricacies of the machine, yes, but I was also in love with this incredible sort of human agency something like this could bring. To a child's mind, having that, quote, desktop factory was actually a dream for an infinite pile of toys and gadgets, all from this mysterious little cube and some spools of plastic. In 2016, I stumbled into a 3D printing workshop in Beijing. My mom paid the entry fee, and I got to design and print my own things for the first time. This workshop was primarily aimed at architecture students, so I had a lot of fun printing stuff like Frank Lloyd Wright buildings and QR codes. I remember this as my first direct exposure to 3D printing, and for the first time, I stepped into a dream I'm only now seeing. One of the teachers showed a video, which I've linked in the description, depicting the future goals of 3D printing. You break something, print a new one, or print a part to fix it. That sentiment of a, quote, desktop factory was really strong back in the day, and the idea that anyone, regardless of age or skill, could own a machine that printed anything and everything was quite beautiful. Later that year, I bought my first 3D printer. Through a local makerspace which hosted a workshop detailing how to build and use one, I ended up with the steel monstrosity that was the Panawan F1, though I believe Westerners on Kickstarter will recognize it by another name. Looking back, this was a really weird printer. Lead screw driven on each axis, the frame was this solid bent steel. It was a really hefty machine, and headless too. You had to put in an SD card formatted with the correct file names before it would actually do anything. And even then it was through a custom slicer, which sucked. But it came with one of the worst hot-ends I've ever had the chance to use. Unclogging it and rebuilding it became a daily activity that often ended with me, with my then short and childish attention span, abandoning it for several weeks at a time. But I always went back to fix it. This machine was primarily built to print PLA, which was quite new at the time, though at some point Panawan released an enclosure and some modifications to the build plate to allow it to print stuff like PETG and ABS. My machine still actually has a nozzle-shaped hole in its original acrylic build plate from when the end-stop screw wasn't correctly set, which was how bed level was set back in the day. Soon I moved on from this printer, first going to the Dreammaker Overlord Pro, which was a Delta machine that was a nightmare to use, then to a series of Creality machines, and after many, many years of pre-built stuff, I took on a Hypercube build. At the time, this linear rod Core XY machine was quite popular. I wanted to build one with the limited resources I had, and I failed terribly. This experience almost made me quit the hobby entirely. I butchered the rest of my printers to build this one, and to no one's surprise, was then promptly left without printers to print parts for this printer. Eventually, after some moping about, I moved on and put together a Prusa Mark III clone, whose lengthy review is actually still up on this channel as one of the first videos I ever made. I used that Prusa clone to print all the parts for my first Voron, and that was that. I was back. The K3, however, was a completely different story. I started building it from a kit the summer I graduated middle school. I bought a Fabrico kit as was recommended and available at the time, and I lugged it all the way from the US back to China to work on. Frankly, I should have just stopped at the default configuration. That summer, I was doing an internship for a summer school with my K3 in tow. Without the panels on and originally built out of Polymaker ABS, please do not use that, the K3 actually printed PLA very well. The default config at the time called for 0.9 degree motors and a 24 volt system, which also worked really well. But I wanted to go faster. So before I actually ever finished the machine, I tore out nearly everything I had built and started over. Originally, I started with these 48 volt independent driver boards from Mello, along with the short shaft 2804 motors. However, after a wiring mishap, which resulted in one of the Armchair Engineering server's emotes, I actually ended up having to throw away a lot of the work that was done there. But that was the least concerning part of this build. I ended up blowing up 3 separate Physect Spider Kings in 3 very stupid ways. One of them, the first one, just randomly broke one day and I had to return it. The second one, unbeknownst to me, had a manufacturing defect and fried itself immediately. The third one, however, died because the provided heatsinks for the TMC 5160 drivers were notched so aggressively and the adhesive so weak, it caused the heatsink from the printer's vibrations to actually tilt and ultimately short out the drivers. By this point, the K3 was getting more and more infuriating. It seemed that the more I touched it, the more it would break, and the time and money I had spent on it was in vain. At some point, I actually wanted to gut it for parts and sell it, but I brought it home instead. And there it sat for about a year, watching as my Bamboo X1 Carbon, the printer that actually printed the original parts for my K3, continued to print without fail. I think some part of me was probably disappointed and sad that at the end of the day, this locked down, open source copycat machine outperformed and was more reliable than my K3. In fact, if you were around for this time period in Armchair Engineering Discord, you would have seen my death row attempt, where people were made to finish their unfinished projects by the end of the year, and if they did not do so, would get banned. I survived, but just barely, and the K3 fell back to a broken mess. This year, however, I picked it back up again. I once again started from scratch, tearing out the entire XY gantry and electronics box for a rebuild. This time around, I printed everything in Fuzzrock Nex ABS 25% glass fiber. I remember fondly when I first used this filament. The extra strength and co-extrusion nature of it made for quite the seamless experience from printing on my Bamboo. The person who recommended me this filament all these years back, Yura, or better known as the Raccoon of Raccoon Works, passed away sometime during this rebuild. In some ways, I wish I had rebuilt this machine sooner instead of sulking over each and every aspect of it, so that, if anything, she would at least have seen this memed-on machine finally finished after all this time. The THK XY gantry rails on this machine were also provided by her in the earlier days of this build. They're a little bit different in size to the Honey Badger rails, and I never bothered rebuilding the gantry before to accommodate them. However, doing this rebuild, I managed to finally give them the treatment they deserved. I realized at some point during this build that this printer was never meant to be what I wanted it to be. If anything, that previous dream of a fully fledged desktop factory has been dead for so many years now. But I realized something. I entered the world of 3D printing as a kid. I'm now an adult. I've practically been raised by tinkering with printers, getting burned by runaway hot-ends, blowing up power supplies and drivers, and tuning these machines. It doesn't really matter anymore how I use them or if I use them. I found my people through 3D printing. I found my calling to build and tinker and create, and that skill, that desire, has remained with me ever since as a maker. So I finished the K3. But in the time it took to get here, I realized that getting it faster, stronger, better in any way, shape, or form was never the point of it. I don't know what was going through my child mind when I started this rabbit hole 12 years ago. I don't know what went through my mind when I bought this kit. I don't know what went through my mind when I tore everything apart and blew up $300 worth of parts. But I know how much of a joy sharing this with the community was. I know how much blood, sweat, and tears I've poured at the building and maintaining and using each and every one of these machines. I no longer dream of a desktop factory. I think I'm on my own now, all grown up. Thanks.